Tesla reported this otherworldly communication and proclaimed his belief in extraterrestrials in February of 1901 in an article for Collier's Weekly titled Talking with the Planets.
There was one night that altered everything for Nikola Tesla. For the remainder of his life, he would not speak about it, not to journalists, not to the wealthy investors financing his work. Only one other person was reportedly inside the room when it occurred, his assistant. Many decades later, as she approached the end of her own life, she finally revealed what the two of them had witnessed inside that tower after midnight. It was something that caused a man known for his fearlessness to remain silent for the rest of his days. According to her, what happened that night should not have been possible, and Tesla spent everything he still possessed ensuring that the world would never discover it had been real. To understand the night, she described however you must begin, where Tesla began, with the tower. The tower he couldn't finish.
MIT researchers are on the forefront of innovation, including the development of wireless transmission of power.
By 1901, Tesla was already internationally famous, and fame by itself no longer satisfied him. He wanted to prove that he was right. On an exposed tract of land in Shoreham along the northern coast of Long Island, Tesla began constructing one of the strangest structures America had ever witnessed. It was a bare wooden framework rising more than 180 feet above the ground, topped by an immense metal dome. From far away, it resembled the head of some enormous mechanical animal buried halfway beneath the earth. Tesla called it Warden Cliff. Most people who looked at the tower had no idea what it was truly designed to accomplish. Tesla preferred to keep it that way. And this is the detail you should remember because it contains the entire story in miniature. You already know one version of Tesla, the version found in textbooks. He was the inventor who helped bring alternating current to the world and illuminated the modern era. The invisible electricity moving through the walls around you at this very second is part of that legacy. That Tesla is safe, established, and widely accepted. But the tower standing in that open field on Long Island belonged to another Tesla. This Tesla was not satisfied with merely lighting the world. He had decided that he wanted to provide power to humanity without charge, and he could not understand why anyone would attempt to prevent him from doing so. To finance this dream, Tesla approached the only man in America wealthy enough to place a bet on something that appeared impossible. J.P. Morgan was the most influential financier in the United States. He had funded railroad steel companies and the electrification of entire cities. When Morgan signed a check, entire industries could come into existence. Tesla told Morgan that Wardenclyffe would transmit wireless messages across the Atlantic Ocean. It would be a faster, more ambitious form of telegraphy, with no physical wire connecting one continent to another. Morgan found that idea attractive. Messages could be sold. Messages created paying customers usage fees and an information empire controlled by whoever owned the systems carrying them. Morgan agreed to invest approximately $150,000, an extraordinary amount of money at the time, and construction began. But Tesla had not revealed the complete truth. Transmitting messages was the least important function the tower had been created to perform. Tesla's actual intention, the purpose he shared only with a small group of assistants whom he trusted absolutely, was to transmit electrical power itself through the atmosphere and the earth. Not radio signals, not voices or sound. Actual electrical energy delivered to any location on the surface of the planet without requiring a single connecting cable. Tesla believed that the earth beneath him was not something electricity had to avoid. He saw the planet as a conductor waiting to be activated. If he could make the tower resonate at precisely the correct frequency, matching what he believed was the natural electrical rhythm of the Earth, then the entire planet might function as one vast circuit. Energy injected into the ground at Shoreham could theoretically emerge again, beyond an ocean, wherever a properly tuned receiver was waiting to collect it. This was not a wild fantasy casually written on a scrap of paper. It had developed from years of genuine experimentation in the dry, thin atmosphere of Colorado Springs. Several years earlier, Tesla had constructed a rougher, more primitive version of the machine. The experiments he conducted there persuaded him that the Earth could be made to resonate like a bell after being struck. He recorded measurements in notebooks. He defended the concept during public lectures. Whatever else anyone might say about him, Tesla was a serious scientist pursuing what he considered a serious scientific idea. The problem was that if the idea succeeded, it could quietly overturn the economic rules governing the entire world. Below the tower, hidden from sight, work crews continued digging. They drove an arrangement of iron pipes far underground, extending toward the water table, and creating what Tesla believed would be a direct physical connection between the tower and the planet. He was nearly obsessive about this section of the design. The link with the Earth had to be flawless, continuous, and intimate. Above the ground, the giant dome would force a corresponding charge into the atmosphere. The Earth would lie below, the sky would stretch above, and Warden Cliff would stand between them like the heart of a machine as large as the world itself. To the laborers forcing pipes down through wet, salty soil, the work was simply exhausting. To Tesla, every additional foot of metal was like a nerve descending into the ground, reaching towards something immense and alive. And only one person was trusted enough to stand beside him on the night he finally attempted to awaken it. The promise that scared the rich.
Tesla became obsessed with trying to receive further radio communications from other planets.
Tesla grew increasingly consumed by the possibility of receiving further radio transmissions from other planets. His assistant was young, trained as an engineer, and according to every surviving description, unusually quiet in a place crowded with enormous personalities and loud ambitions. According to her own account, and it is primarily her testimony that carried this story into the future, she stood beside a workbench the first time she saw something impossible occur. She held a pencil, yet the paper in front of her remained blank because she had completely forgotten to write. Lamps positioned miles away from the tower, connected to no visible source of electricity, began glowing softly before her eyes. She later said that she could do nothing except stare as light appeared from empty space. Something inside her chest became cold and still. To Tesla standing on the opposite side of the room, it was not a supernatural event. It was evidence. And that was the moment the real danger began. At some point, J.P. Morgan started to realize what his money had actually been used to build. Consider the question from Morgan's perspective. If Tesla was correct, if electricity could be injected into the ground in one location and freely extracted anywhere else on Earth by anyone possessing the necessary receiver, then who could be charged for using it? The open atmosphere cannot be fitted with a meter. The soil beneath a farmhouse in a distant country cannot easily be locked behind a gate. A world supplied with unlimited wireless electricity at no cost would be a world without electric utilities. Coal magnates, oil empires, or powerful owners standing at the entrance and demanding payment. Morgan had not invested in the future so that the future could be distributed free of charge. There is an uncomfortable truth beneath this entire conflict, and it deserves careful consideration. Morgan did not need to behave like a theatrical villain. He only needed to remain consistent with the economic system he had spent his life building. He had been presented with a machine that, if it fulfilled Tesla's promise, could destroy the very principle Morgan had devoted his career to monetizing. No rational businessman willingly finances the elimination of his own power. From that point forward, the flow of money was never truly going to continue. The only remaining question was what event would finally cause Morgan to close the valve completely. You can almost watch that process unfold in the surviving correspondence between the two men. As Tesla became more enthusiastic and explicit about the tower's genuine capabilities, Morgan's responses became colder, shorter, and increasingly distant. Eventually, they barely qualified as responses at all. A secretary would send a few brief, impersonal lines. It was the sound of a door gradually and silently closing. Without openly declaring it, the most powerful financier in America had already concluded that this particular version of the future would not be permitted to enter the marketplace. Before we continue deeper into the tower and reach the night when everything changed, do the one thing that allows stories like this to continue. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It may appear unimportant, but it genuinely is not. That small action often determines whether another story like this can be made. Now, return with me to Long Island to the point when the funding began disappearing, because this is where the truly strange portion of the story starts. By 1903, Tesla had begun receiving warnings. Reduce the scale of the work. Remain within the plans that had officially been approved. Do not construct the machine you have now admitted you actually intend to create. Tesla ignored all of them. He believed with absolute sincerity that he was preparing to give humanity an extraordinary gift. heat, light, and electricity delivered from the air to even the poorest community on Earth, without wires and without payment. He was not attempting to endanger anyone. He simply could not imagine that giving something valuable to the world for free might be treated like a criminal act. He was about to discover that it could, and he would make that discovery in darkness, accompanied by only one witness. The night they ran it at full power.
Based on these transmissions that Tesla was receiving, he developed the theory that this extraterrestrial presence had been on Earth.
According to the version later told by his assistant, the decisive experiment occurred during a motionless spring night in 1903. It was long after midnight. The nearby town had become completely dark and silent. There were no newspaper reporters at the site. No investors, no government inspectors, no one was present to create an official account of what was about to occur. There was only Tesla, his assistant, and a machine that had never been permitted to operate at its maximum capacity. That was precisely why they were there. For the first time, Tesla intended to remove every limitation. His assistant wrote that he followed his usual procedure, beginning below ground. He inspected the grounding system, walking past the iron pipes descending into the damp earth, the tower's living connection to the planet. Tesla appeared composed and systematic. He had rehearsed the experiment in his mind hundreds of times. Everything was prepared. After returning to the main chamber, he positioned himself beside the master control and gave his assistant a slight nod. It was the only instruction she required. Then Tesla completed the circuit. The sound began almost immediately. At first, it was a deep vibration, something more easily felt through the teeth than heard through the ears. The massive copper coils started trembling as the electrical load increased. The tone grew lower and denser, expanding through the chamber until it no longer sounded like equipment. Instead, it resembled something enormous, slowly emerging from sleep. The floor vibrated beneath them. The atmosphere became tight and unnatural, like the charged stillness immediately before lightning strikes. Narrow blue sparks crept over the metal railings and traced the edges of the instruments. It seemed as though the entire room was being brought to life from the exterior inward. Then the crown of the tower released its energy. A tremendous column of white-blue electricity burst from the dome and extended upward into the night. It was not a brief spark. It was not a momentary flash. It was a continuous, stable pillar of electrical fire that remained suspended in the sky, refusing to disappear, as ordinary lightning should. People several miles away would later claim that the night had become brighter than anything they had previously witnessed. Brighter than a violent storm, brighter than sunrise. It was like an artificial midday appearing in the center of the night. Then came the phenomenon his assistant could never completely explain, regardless of how often she repeated her account. Along the dark coastline inside, isolated buildings with no wires attached to them, and no apparent electrical connection, lights began switching on. Lamps glowed inside empty rooms. It was as though unseen hands had entered houses miles away and raised the lights one after another. This was exactly the capability Tesla had assured Morgan he was not constructing. And during that spring night, observed by only one other person, the system appeared to be functioning. Tesla did not cheer. His assistant said that he remained almost motionless. His eyes shifted repeatedly among the measurement needles, while his lips quietly formed numbers. Even while standing inside the impossible result he had pursued for most of his life, he continued collecting data. Some disciplined, detached part of his mind was still performing calculations. Then, the experiment began to fail. Across Long Island, telegraph operators reportedly found their transmissions disintegrating. Messages could no longer pass through the lines. Certain stations lost power completely, as though an unseen force had reached across the region and disconnected the entire system. Inside Wardenclyffe, Tesla's instruments began behaving violently. Gauge needles struck beyond the highest values printed on their faces. They jerked in directions and at speeds the instruments had never been engineered to withstand. Tesla understood the danger before his assistant did. The electrical force returning through the Earth was rising faster and with greater intensity than the equipment could absorb. The balance Tesla had so carefully established had moved beyond its safe limit. The planet appeared to be answering the tower, and its response was more powerful than Tesla's machine. The copper components started becoming dangerously hot. A thin ribbon of smoke rose from the lower section of a generator. His assistant shouted a warning. Tesla was already moving. He crossed the room, reached the primary lever, and forced it downward in one decisive motion, cutting the entire system. the deep vibration collapsed. The electrical arc above the tower disappeared as suddenly as the flame of a candle being extinguished. The shaking beneath their feet ended. The silence that replaced it was so complete, his assistant later said that the atmosphere itself seemed heavy. It felt as though the room were holding its breath and was frightened to release it. Tesla remained beside the lever. For a long moment, he did not speak or move. Then, in a quiet voice that sounded almost directed toward himself, he said that the system had worked. His assistant never forgot his tone. There was no celebration in it. There was no pride or victory. For the rest of her life, she insisted that what she heard in Tesla's voice was fear. He had just demonstrated the central idea upon which he had risked his career, reputation, and fortune. Yet he sounded like someone who had opened an entrance and suddenly realized he might not know how to close it. The men at the tree line.
Westinghouse and Tesla set out to light America. To do that, they needed a power source, and Tesla had an audacious one in mind.
For several minutes after the shutdown, Tesla and his assistant remained silent. Weak static continued snapping around the dome overhead as the machine settled almost like a creature recovering its breath. She attempted to question him, but Tesla offered no response. Instead, he removed a small notebook and began covering its pages with calculations. She later said that no one saw those numbers again after that night. When Tesla finally spoke, he only said that the results had exceeded his predictions by an enormous margin. Another experiment would be necessary. The following test would have to take place under far stricter control. Then he ordered her not to discuss the event with anyone. She was not to tell the laborers. She was not to speak to the maintenance workers. She could not mention it to a single person. Within approximately 1 hour, Tesla had changed from a scientist desperate for public acceptance into a man terrified that information about his success might reach the wrong people. While they moved through the chamber and deactivated the remaining equipment, his assistant glanced beyond the perimeter fence. That was when she understood that they had not been the only witnesses. At the border of the trees, barely visible in the weak gray light, several human figures stood without moving. They said nothing. They did not attempt to conceal themselves. They also made no effort to approach the tower. They simply remained at the tree line observing Warden Cliff. Even from that distance and in the darkness, she felt certain they were not curious residents who had left their homes to investigate the unusual light overhead. Their posture appeared deliberate. There was something trained and controlled in the manner in which they stood. They did not resemble farmers. They did not resemble fishermen. Someone had apparently been positioned beyond the fence during the entire experiment. The realization sent a cold sensation through her stomach. In her account, the men wore ordinary dark clothing. Nothing identified them. There were no badges, no symbols, no visible insignia. She did not recognize them as local residents. They were not reporters who generally arrived noisily and rarely appeared secretly in the middle of the night. They also did not resemble the financial inspectors Morgan occasionally sent to evaluate the property. These observers appeared to belong to another category entirely. They had traveled there after midnight, specifically to witness the same event Tesla's assistant had just seen. By the following morning, although no newspaper had published a single sentence about the experiment, word had already moved through less visible networks. A letter was delivered directly to the tower by one of Morgan's representatives. It contained no praise. It expressed no amazement. It showed no curiosity about what Tesla had achieved. Instead, the message delivered a warning. It stated that the previous night's activity had created serious concern about what it described as the uncontrolled dissemination of electrical power. Translated into ordinary language, the meaning was difficult to misunderstand. Tesla had transmitted energy in a manner that could not be monitored, could not be measured by anyone other than himself, and could not be controlled by the people who considered the future their property. During the years that followed, his assistant came to believe that not all of the silent observers near the trees had been employed by Morgan. She became convinced that several had been government agents. Some may have represented the United States. Others she believed could have worked for foreign governments. They had been sent to observe a demonstration that certain governments had quietly anticipated for many years. On that night in the Long Island field, Tesla's research ceased to be treated as ordinary scientific investigation. In the eyes of the people with real authority, it had crossed an invisible boundary and begun to resemble a weapon. This was not because Tesla wished to create a weapon. It was because of the power his invention threatened merely by existing. Consider what a successful Wardenclyffe Tower would actually represent. Free energy is an inspiring phrase until you earn your fortune by selling electricity taxing fuel, or using control of energy supplies to pressure weaker countries. A device capable of pushing electricity through the earth to any chosen location would threaten far more than utility corporations. It could challenge the oil and coal industries. It could disrupt national revenue systems. It could alter military planning. It could undermine the entire hidden structure, determining which countries and institutions possess power over others. If energy becomes completely decentralized, political and economic control may become decentralized with it. And institutions built on control rarely surrender it willingly. To a small collection of extremely influential people, Tesla's achievement was not a miracle. It was a danger that needed to be deactivated before the public discovered it had ever functioned. The unraveling. And the project was shut down with remarkable speed. Only days after the warning letter arrived, Morgan ended all remaining financial support. There was no extended conversation. Tesla received no second meeting. He was offered no final opportunity to defend the project. The funding simply ended. Once the money disappeared, everything surrounding Wardenclyffe began collapsing at a frightening pace. The workforce diminished almost immediately. Some employees were formally dismissed. Others understood the situation and quietly abandoned the site. Shipments of equipment and construction materials stopped arriving. Work froze at the exact stage it had reached. Wardenclyffe, the greatest project Tesla had ever attempted, the tower he hoped would transform civilization, began changing from a technological wonder into an abandoned structure, slowly being consumed by rust. Then unfamiliar visitors began appearing. Officials entered the property and referred to safety violations, patent disputes, and an endless succession of administrative explanations. Each justification appeared less convincing than the previous one. According to Tesla's assistant, however, these visits never truly resembled normal inspections. They felt colder, quieter, and more deliberate. Unidentified men wearing no visible indication of their organization entered restricted sections of the complex with an authority that ordinary inspectors did not possess. They evaluated the equipment like experienced specialists. They searched through documents. They examined Tesla's research records as though they had known before, arriving exactly which materials they wanted and exactly where those materials would be located. Then objects began disappearing from the facility. Large wooden containers were filled with Tesla's most sensitive instruments and custom-built components. The crates were carried outside and loaded onto vehicles waiting near the boundary of the land. Documents also began vanishing from the shelves. Tesla's laboratory notebooks disappeared. His architectural and electrical drawings were removed. These were not meaningless sketches or incomplete concepts. They were detailed technical plans explaining how Wardenclyffe operated and what Tesla intended to accomplish during later phases of construction. The documents disappeared gradually, one folder after another. Until the final years of her life, Tesla's assistant believed those materials had been taken into government possession. No conclusive evidence ever proved her belief. She argued that the absence of proof was itself part of the method. There were no receipts, no public statements, no official records acknowledging that anything had been removed. Afterward, Tesla appeared to become a different person. He was quieter. He withdrew emotionally. She saw him visibly disturbed in a way she had never observed during all their previous years together. Tesla continued working because invention was the only way he understood how to live. But his projects became smaller. He worked in confined rooms on modest machines. He filled page after page with ideas he would never again attempt to construct at full scale. For the remainder of his life, he never pursued another project comparable to Wardenclyffe. There were no additional towers. There were no more enormous outdoor demonstrations beneath the open sky. The overwhelming ambition that had defined his entire existence appeared to disappear from him like a lamp extinguished by a switch located somewhere beyond his reach. Near the end of their association, his assistant asked whether he intended to begin again. Would he rebuild the tower? Would he complete what the two of them had started during that night? Tesla stared at her for a long time before answering. He said only that they had discovered it worked, and that was precisely the reason they had stopped it. She never determined who Tesla meant when he used the word they. She carried that sentence for the rest of her life. Again and again, she turned it over in her thoughts. She never reached the bottom of its meaning. Warden Cliff remained abandoned in the salty coastal air. It decayed. Later, it was dismantled section by section. Eventually, the material was sold as scrap to reduce the debts the project had created for Tesla. He made no attempt to rescue it. The tower intended to rebuild the world was destroyed without resistance. The land where it had once stood became silent again, as though nothing unusual had ever occurred there. Whatever Tesla learned on that spring night remained with him. He carried the secret without explanation for another 4 decades. Eventually, it followed him into a locked hotel room on the 33rd floor of a building in New York City. And there, the strangest section of the story was still waiting. What died in room 3327? At this point, the narrative moves away from legend and returns to events supported by documented history. Yet the documented events may be almost as disturbing as the legend. Nikola Tesla died alone in January 1943 inside room 3327 of the New Yorker Hotel in Manhattan. He had almost no money. The hotel had allowed him to remain, even though it had largely stopped believing that his bills would ever be paid. His health had been declining for years. Nearly everything Tesla still owned could be placed inside several locked trunks and filing cabinets. They contained decades of notebooks, technical drawings, correspondence, and calculations. The accumulated work of one of the most unconventional thinkers of the century had been reduced to a small collection of luggage and papers inside a rented room. Before his body had even grown cold, government representatives arrived. They were not limited to local police officers. Within hours, officials from the Office of Alien Property entered the hotel and assumed control over the contents of Tesla's room. That wartime agency had been created to confiscate and administer property belonging to foreign nationals. One detail has continued to trouble nearly everyone who studies the event carefully. Tesla had become a naturalized citizen of the United States in 1891. He was not legally a foreign national. He had been an American citizen for more than 50 years. According to the Office of Alien Property's own purpose and regulations, the agency should have had no authority over his possessions. It took them anyway. The room was closed and secured. Tesla's papers, experimental devices, and personal belongings were removed. Witnesses later recalled seeing locked trunks being transported from the hotel. Within one day, thousands of pages of correspondence designs, scientific notes, and unfinished inventions disappeared from public access. Among the confiscated documents were plans for a technology Tesla had promoted during the final period of his life. He called the device Teleforce. Newspapers gave it a far more dramatic name, the Death Ray. Tesla described Teleforce as a system that could project a concentrated stream of electrically charged particles through the air. He claimed the beam might possess enough force to destroy aircraft from hundreds of miles away. However, Tesla did not present the machine as an instrument for invading other nations. Because of his unusual idealism, he imagined it as an unbeatable defensive barrier. Every national border would become impossible to penetrate. Every attack would guarantee the attacker's destruction. Tesla believed war itself might become pointless because no army could cross the invisible wall. During his final years, he offered the concept to several governments. None publicly accepted his proposal. Following his death, the Teleforce documents were classified. A significant portion of the relevant information has never been completely released even today. There is also a genuine documented qualification that versions of this legend frequently omit. An honest examination of the story requires including it. The American government assigned the confiscated documents to a young electrical engineer from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology named John Trump. Trump reviewed the collection and concluded that most of Tesla's work was theoretical, speculative, or philosophical. According to his official evaluation, the papers contain little of immediate practical value to a country engaged in war. That conclusion is part of the historical record and must be considered beside every other detail. Yet it has never completely resolved the mystery. Regardless of the evaluation, the papers remained sealed. Certain portions stayed classified for many years, and the entire body of work belonging to an American citizen had still been collected by an agency established to manage the property of foreigners. Eventually, a large part of the surviving archive was transferred to a museum in Belgrade, created to preserve Tesla's legacy. Much of it remains there. Years later, when investigators located several men who had participated in Tesla's wireless energy experiments, more than a few refused to discuss their involvement. Their unwillingness to speak became more memorable than anything they might have revealed. That silence leaves us with a more complicated question than the legend usually acknowledges. The part that is still true. Where then does this story leave us? It leaves us inside the narrow distance separating historical documentation from impossibility. At this point, I need to be completely honest in a way the legend often is not. Tesla's unnamed assistant, the precise events of the alleged 1903 experiment, the silent observers at the edge of the trees, and the testimony or recording she supposedly produced near the end of her life, all reach us primarily through a story repeated for more than 100 years. It has passed from one person to another. Some portions have been softened through repetition. Other sections have become more dramatic. Many people retold it because they wanted it to be true. No authenticated notebook supports the account. No verified photograph proves the night occurred as described. No confirmed audio recording connects the assistant's story to the official historical archive. And whenever a retelling suddenly introduces a conveniently identified professor or a secret folder containing perfect evidence, caution is necessary. That is often the moment when a powerful legend begins manufacturing proof for itself. An explanation for why evidence may be absent is not equivalent to evidence. Yet there is a reason the story continues to fascinate people and refuses to disappear. The historical framework surrounding it is genuine. Warden Cliff existed. The land on which it stood can still be located. J.P. Morgan's investment was real. His decision to end that financial support was also real, documented in surviving correspondence between Morgan and Tesla. Tesla truly believed that electrical power could be transmitted through the earth. He defended the concept in his own writings and in his own handwriting. The dramatic story may belong to legend. The structure supporting it belongs to history. And perhaps the most unusual confirmation comes not from Long Island, but from Tesla's earlier work in Colorado. Before Wardenclyffe, Tesla operated his magnifying transmitter at maximum power in Colorado Springs. During one experiment, he pushed the system beyond its limit. The machine demanded such an immense quantity of electricity that it overloaded the local utility company's generator. The generator released a violent shower of sparks. Electrical service failed across the surrounding area, causing part of the town to fall suddenly into darkness. That incident is not folklore. It happened. It is historically recorded. One man working inside a wooden laboratory equipped with a coil, an idea, and an extraordinary willingness to take risks managed to switch off the electricity of an entire community. Once you know that event genuinely occurred, the assistant's fearful description of a night when the sky glowed and distant lamps illuminated themselves no longer sounds entirely invented. It begins to resemble an exaggerated, partially remembered reflection of something Tesla was demonstrably capable of producing. That is the precise territory occupied by this story. It exists in the narrow, electrically charged distance between what history confirms Tesla accomplished and what no surviving evidence can prove he discovered. Throughout his life, Tesla insisted that the planet itself could distribute electrical power to every region of the world. He believed it could be provided freely to anyone who required it. The individuals wealthy enough to make that vision possible examined the tower he was creating. Then they allowed it to decay into the earth. Whatever their motives may have been, they abandoned it. And Tesla, the one person who understood the system more completely than anyone else alive, never attempted to rebuild it. So, tonight I want you to set aside the familiar textbook version of Tesla. Forget the safe, settled figure whose accepted achievements are repeated by everyone. Consider the other Tesla for a moment. Imagine a man who may have activated a machine powerful enough to frighten even its inventor. Imagine him writing a page of figures that no one would ever see again. Then imagine that same man spending the remainder of his life refusing to repeat the experiment. If you remained with me until this point, you are exactly the person these stories are created for. Subscribe and remain close because the next story is already being drawn out of the darkness. Then leave your opinion in the comments. Do you believe Tesla discovered something inside Wardenclyffe that humanity was not prepared to receive, and that someone with power ensured the discovery remained hidden? Or is this simply the story of an isolated genius, a legend hungry for mystery, and generations of people who desired the story to be true so intensely that they filled its empty spaces themselves, I read the responses. Tell me which explanation you believe, and tell me.